the trend is catching up with the reality that there are more people out there who are capable and can contribute to the country without having to be in KL or whatever. And I think this is something that is important. Yes, geography helps, but I think nothing would actually suggest that you cannot succeed if you don't, if you have those qualities that I mentioned earlier.
Before we move on to the Q&A session, I have my last question, and this issue I'd like to raise is about meritocracy versus seniority. The panelist today is very young and is a very high position where you are today. Do you think Malaysia is still, do you think Malaysian community still regards seniority first, and then disregard the younger generation trying to delve into the corporate world? In my experience in training in investment banks and internship and abroad, they really take care of these young interns coming in because they want the best, and they highly regard upon us as even young interns just for a month interning with them. Do you think in Malaysia the culture has grown towards that direction, regarding highly upon young graduates, and not just young graduates and young corporate executives, instead of looking up to the seniority positions first? Would you like to start, Stephen?
Well, let me take a stab at this. It's actually a very pertinent and interesting question. I think my colleagues here today would also be would have thoughts on this, because many of them are from our human capital team. I think on this issue about whether you need young versus old, seniority, experience versus smarts and youth. I think there is an unfortunate sort of dichotomy that's been created. Again, I go back to my point from the previous question that we're too small a country to start saying that a portion of our country is not not as valuable as another portion of it. Again, once you start dividing the 27 million to the young, to the old, and so on, you really then start losing the full scale of the resources that we have. The short answer, I think, is that Malaysia is an extremely dynamic place, and I can compare this with places like UK, Dubai, in the US. Dynamic in the sense that your age is not an impediment, and I think that's very important, and I think that's very positive. But that's also something that has happened because it is something that we have no choice when we actually look at this point. Primarily because a lot of our development needs to be supported by the right human capital. And the reality is our human capital is rapidly developing and changing. Just compare yourselves and your parents. You would see that there's a vast difference between your opportunities and your exposure to what's out there versus your parents. And this is just one generation. And a lot of people don't realize this, and we need to put this in context. Last year we celebrated our 50th anniversary of our independence. We've only been independent for 50 years. But the strides that we've made as a country is far more than what many countries have been able to achieve, despite having been independent and able to chart their own destiny for much longer periods. So I think this is what we need to realize, is that because of the scale and the speed of how things are changing, both young and old, both youth and experience needs to gel. And I'm actually more heartened to see that on the youth side, the supply is very strong. The pipeline is very good. Having worked with UKAC, having met with many of you, and having looked at the backgrounds and the exposure that many of you all are getting, I think we are well served, hopefully, for the future. But what's challenging is actually bridging between your generation and people who have experience. Because at the end of the day, just having dynamism, having the smarts, having the energy is not sufficient. And this is actually a challenge that at Khazanah, for instance, we face. We are fairly young as an organization, not because we wanted to be young, but it was the only way that we could actually quickly scale up to carry the task that had been entrusted upon us. And given the subject matter that we were dealing with, like investments and looking at things which typically tend to be very fast moving and more of a recent development. But the key challenge for us actually is getting what we call the grey hair content. It is very difficult to get the right coaches, the right experienced people to work alongside our inexperienced team members to give them that sense of perspective and impart that wisdom. And I think this is actually going to be the key challenge for us as a country as well, where both sides need to come together and interact in a way that would benefit from their own perspective. I came from a very interesting experience, just in my last point, this last 2 days, on Thursday and Friday, where we had a seminar with the nominee directors that Khazanah appoints to many of the companies that we control. So this would be very senior people that Khazanah appoint as our nominee directors to listed companies and so on. So it was a room of maybe about 25 people with like 5 Tansleys and the Reverend Datos and so on. And then you had on the other side about 10 of us who were from Khazanah, who were the nominee directors or the desk officers who were working alongside all these people. You can imagine the huge generational gap. You had on one hand someone who may be a vice president or assistant vice president at Khazanah, maybe in his late 20s, early 30s, and on the other hand, you have a retired Director General of Ministry of Health. How do they begin to interact and create additional value for one another? And yet it happened. It was magical. And I think this is where I think for all of you, the challenge is actually not to have preconceived ideas or notions about experience, because use the people that you meet who have experience as a resource. Understand and learn from them, what the challenges that they have gone through, what are the experiences that they've had, and how they actually dealt with it. And that, I think, will be a key way that you can also develop yourself, and hopefully this is how a country can then, come together and move forward.
When I was in university, I actually thought that Malaysia didn't have enough meritocracy. I was very angry and idealistic, and I felt that things would be a lot better than they are. But over the last 10 years or 12 years, I've realized that a lot of things have changed. There is a lot more meritocracy now than there was before. But I think there's 2 reasons for that. One is, as I grew older, I also began to respect older people more because they have a lot to contribute. And I think my idea of what was fair probably wasn't the best idea of what is actually fair. It was just my point of view, and I think that's what happens when you're younger. But the other thing is, I think we've also evolved. The country has definitely evolved, especially over the last 10 years. And I think now it's, things against meritocracy won't last long. There's the internet, there's many young people coming up, and even if you try to fight meritocracy by having, say, nepotism or seniority complex or anything like that, it won't never last long because all the faults are easily shown these days. So I feel that meritocracy will definitely push through in the long run. But as Ahmad mentioned, there is a lot to learn from people who have experience. So it wasn't just the fact that Malaysia has changed, it was also the fact that I've changed, and I realized that what I thought was fair probably wasn't exactly fair with my level of wisdom at the point in time.
Okay, meritocracy versus seniority. I think for our generation, I consider